There are reports this morning that a paedophile has been given a tougher sentence because his victims are Asian rather than white. Jamal Mohammed Rahim al-Nasir was jailed for 7 years last year and yesterday had an appeal to reduce his sentence rejected because, in the words of the judge, the victim's fathers were concerned about the future marriage prospects and the impact on the victims and their families within this particular community. Our legal expert Clive Coleman is here to explain. So this sentence has been upheld. Is this unusual?
Well, I think sometimes, Joanna, you get a story in the press and it appears to say something which, when you look a little more carefully, it really doesn't quite stack up, because this is a report in today's Daily Telegraph. It says child molester given longer sentence as victims are Asian, and underneath it says judge right to give West Yorkshire paedophile tougher sentence as Asian sex abuse victims suffer more than those who are white. Appeal court rules. Okay. Now, if you look at this case a little more carefully, you find that Mr. al-Nasir was jailed for 7 years at Leeds Crown Court last December. He was convicted of 2 counts of sexual assault on a child under 13 and 4 counts of sexual activity with a child. Now, the judge sentencing him, who I should say, by the way, is an extremely experienced judge in these type of cases. She's a lead for the Judicial College, which trains judges on vulnerable witnesses. But she said that the fact that the victims were Asian had been factored in as an aggravating feature. Let me just explain to you how sentences are arrived at in this and many other cases. What the court looks at is it looks at the harm done to the victim, and it looks at the culpability of the offender. So culpability of the offender, how blameworthy is it premeditated, is he in a position of trust, that kind of thing. And the harm done to the victim will take into account a range of factors, but it is perfectly legitimate, and indeed it's something the judge needs to take into account, if the victims are particularly vulnerable because of their personal circumstances or because of the community within which they find themselves, and the view that the community might take of the effect of the crime. Now that, it seems from this fairly brief report, is what happened in this case. Normally there'll be either a victim impact statement before the court, or there'll be live evidence. It appears here perhaps the fathers did give live evidence. I stress I don't know that, but from this report that's the impression one's given. Now that is evidence before the court that the judge must take into consideration. The defence are in court as well, and they can challenge that evidence if they wish to do so and if they see fit to do so. In my view, what's happened here, and indeed this was the Court of Appeal's view, is that the judge has done exactly what the judge was supposed to do. She has looked at the degree of harm inflicted upon this particular victim in the particular circumstances that these victims found themselves.
Just briefly, what difference could this have made to the duration of the sentence? What could it have been without this as an aggravating factor?
Well, I haven't got the full sentencing remarks from the judge, but what judges will do, they'll find starting points for sentences based on this matrix of harm and culpability. They will then adjust upwards or downwards depending on aggravating and mitigating features. And clearly it had an effect in increasing the sentence, but aggravating features do increase a sentence.
Let's bring in Shaista Gohir, the chairwoman of the Muslim Women's Network. She's in Birmingham. What do you think about this?
Good morning. First of all, justice must not discriminate, and by reading the media headlines, it appears that the judge may have given a heavier sentence due to the Asian background of the victims. I don't believe that has actually been the case. I think there's been a miscommunication. Perhaps I think what should have happened is the judge probably should have explained the underlying or technical issues around sentencing. So I'm glad actually on this programme we're actually hearing an alternative perspective. What I believe has happened is this. In 2013, the Crown Prosecution Service did a consultation on child sexual exploitation. Many organisations, including ours, responded to this. We highlighted the fact that Asian girls do not come forward when they are abused, and many have been abused for decades, but they don't show up in the statistics. And one of the reasons is because of the shame and honour card. The Asian men purposefully exploit this to prevent them from telling anybody about the abuse. They blackmail them, and they really exploit this. And of course, the risk of to the girls when the families find out is honour-based violence, forced marriage. Sometimes girls are taken abroad and left abroad. So in response to this, there was new sentencing guidelines in April 2014. And one of the guidelines said that sentencing can be increased if victims are threatened with exposure of abuse to their family and others, in other words, blackmail. So I'm assuming this is also been taken into account, because actually this could actually apply to any victim of any background, and he's applied it in this instance, and the likelihood is he's taken into account that this victim might have been at risk of further abuse and re-victimisation. But I think what I'm really worried about is that this has been turned into a race issue. What if this had been a white victim and the sentence had been increased, or because of her racial background, or the judge said, I'm increasing the sentence because the man is Asian? I think the media probably wouldn't have said anything. I think what we all need to do is come together and do as much as we can to make sure offenders are caught and make sure that they get the heaviest sentences as possible. What are we complaining about? That the man has got an increased sentence. We should be happy about this. My feeling is when the victims are Asian or black, there is not that much of an outrage. I do feel that when it's young white females, particularly being exploited by Asian men, I think the outrage is more, but we should be equally angry regardless of the racial background of the victims.
Shaista Gohir, thank you very much, and thank you, Clive.